Denver police are looking into the death of 17-year-old Jessica Hernandez, who was shot by 2 officers while driving a stolen car through an alley in the Park Hill neighborhood. Police Chief Robert White and Denver's Independent Monitor have launched separate investigations of both the incident and the policies of using deadly force when a moving vehicle is involved. Patty, this story has evolved through the week. We've had different protests involved, even issues within the protests. What do you make of at least the investigations from both the police and the Denver Independent Monitor?
Well, I can't think of an incident in Denver that has had more of an outcry. We have over 1,000 comments on the posts we've done at Westward. And mostly now we know, so what we know is what we don't know. It is incredible how the facts keep shifting on this. We know that the cops didn't know that this was a 17-year-old girl, a Latina, gay, as she was driving. They just knew there was someone in a car, stolen car. But this is also a girl who, if you look, was writing poetry, was working with the Art with Ashes program, had a very tough life, was trying to pull out of it. So we're going to know a lot more about her background. And we know she'd been in trouble with the law before, but that doesn't mean she should be shot dead. What we're going to find out also is how much the Denver Police Department shoot at a lot of moving cars. This is not the first person who was killed while driving a stolen car this year. Denver does seem to use deadly force against moving vehicles more than any other any police department, and that's going to come out in the investigations, I think. Denver also doesn't have all its cars equipped with cameras. In fact, very few are, which is really unusual for a major metropolitan police department where, you know, they want to get cameras on the individual officers, but the cars don't have them, and that's another issue. So Nicholas Mitchell, the Independent Monitor, may be the busiest man in Denver, Colorado right now, because this is not the only investigation he's looking into. He's also still working on the sheriff's department complaints. So he will be doing an investigation. We're going to have another one from the Denver police. I hope we don't have one from the Justice Department, but right now there's a move to invite the Justice Department in to look at Denver. That came up 6 years ago when we were having problems with the police department, and I think right now we would prefer not to be under the federal guidelines, but instead seeing if we can clean up our own house. There's several moves forward on that. I think we'll probably see a renewed attempt to not have the Denver DA in charge of investigating police shootings, but an independent doing that. We see Paul Lopez is also going forward to introduce a bill in the City Council to improve the Office of Independent Monitors staff, just beef that up. So there's some changes that are going to be made, but the number of investigations right now in Denver on different cases is incredible. I don't know how there's anyone left who can do the investigation.
It certainly seems to be the challenge in Denver right now. David, earlier in the week, the Denver Police Department put on their Facebook page seemingly a screenshot of their policy of when to shoot at a moving vehicle and highlighted certain parts of it. Didn't offer a whole lot of explanation there, and maybe there was further that I just didn't see. When you see something like that from a police department, that kind of like, you know, here's our policy, are they trying to illuminate that they were doing right before these investigations happened? What do you think about that?
Well, they were putting out their policy, which is for the public to know about, which is a good one. And the policy is don't shoot at a moving car unless it's a life-threatening emergency. And if what the police have said is true, and the only reason to think it's not is a claim by one of the passengers in the stolen car. But that's why we have an independent monitor, for one thing, to investigate that. But if the police description is accurate, of course it was an emergency. The law is well established that a moving automobile is just as much of a deadly weapon as a firearm or a bomb or a sword. When you are driving a car at somebody trying to hit them, you are engaged in an attempted murder. And anybody who is the victim of that has the right to use deadly force when no lesser force will suffice to protect yourself. And that's a police officer, and police officer lives matter just as much as everybody else's life. And so when you see all these people who are rushing to blame the police and coming at them with a presumption of guilt, which seems to have a pretty weak factual foundation, at least so far. To me, that eliminates them as anybody credible in the future on issues of police use of force. And of course, there have been a lot of problems with police use of force in the Denver Police Department. But these people who are coming after the Denver police for what overwhelmingly looks like a life-saving necessary use of force in self-defense against an attempted homicide, I think are immolating their credibility.
Penn, Dave brings up the point about the folks that are coming after the police here, but admittedly, the police have offered at least 3 different variations of the story, and I get it that if you have, there's always it's going to be evolving from the morning of to that day to everything else, but it hasn't been crystal clear. Patty talked about there isn't cameras, at least that car didn't have a dashboard camera. Is there some inconsistencies that go beyond just the eyewitness that David talks about?
You know, I think there are, and I think that's the problem here. But part of it is, I think, is innocent and understandable. If you've got 6 police officers on the scene standing in 6 different places, they probably legitimately saw 6 different things, and they'll describe it differently. But part of what happens is when you get this sort of a tragic outcome, there's a police officer who's injured, there's a young woman who's been killed. People tend to evaluate it and look at it and say, all right, this was the first story put out. Now this account is put out. Now this account is put out. And they're all by police officers, and they don't match up. And then when you have one of the passengers, and their most recent account was, we were stopped, they fired into the car, and when she was killed was why she lost control and why it went forward and hit the police officer. That puts a whole nother spin on all of this. And so I think the best advice to all of us as a community is sort of slow down for a minute. This is a tragic situation. Let the monitor do its job. Let the police department go ahead and investigate. And at some point, some coherent version of the facts should come out. The most difficult thing is if we never find out what really happened, which could be the result. And then we're going to be, you know, flying off of a bunch of assumptions. But no, this is a tough one. And you look at it on its face and you have to ask yourself, why is a 17-year-old girl dead over a potential car theft? We're just fortunate that some of the other passengers in the car weren't also killed.
Susan, as Penn alluded to, we've seen a lot of reaction, and there's been protests regarding this. And frankly, even this was all by itself, without anything happening last year, we probably see some protests, people asking questions of the community. But considering what this community and really the United States has come from the last year or so, this isn't going to go away anytime soon.
No, one thing I want to note is the bulk of the controversy regarding the Denver Safety Department in the last several years has been around the Sheriff's Department and its treatment in the jail. The excessive force cases have generally been around that and not the cops. When I moved here to actually cover the city, it was about the cops and the police, and I think by all accounts, you know, its policies and its management have changed. And included among those policies is this amendment passed in 2008, which is a policy adopted by most major cities: don't shoot at a moving car. So number one, we know we have a problem here because this is the 4th shooting at a moving car by Denver police in 7 months. Number two, in reaction to what Dave said, he said there's this presumption of guilt against the cops. We do know from lots of investigations, including the Marvin Booker investigation, the death of Paul Childs, that law enforcement officers actually do sometimes not tell the truth about these things. What we also know is the independent monitor hardly ever finds fault with safety officials, and so his independence is questioned. And we also know that the DA, Mitch Morrissey, who's ending his 3rd term, has never prosecuted anyone for excessive force. So the need for an independent prosecutor, I think, is perfectly legitimate here.